That's actually quite a good one. I like that. What are some of the disadvantages or drawbacks of using Scrum? As an interview question, I actually like this because you have to have done something with Scrum. You can't have just read the Scrum guide and regurgitate it. We're talking about, I've tried this and this didn't quite work. For me, I'm going to be looking at, there's a whole load of things, but let's narrow it down a bit. So the first thing that comes to mind is Scrum requires a load of stuff to at least fill a sprint, probably a couple of weeks worth of work. And if you don't have it, it's really hard. I've seen teams try, they don't have enough work to fill a sprint on any given sprint, but they want to do Scrum. So they go into planning and they take their whole backlog because there's not enough to fill the 2 weeks, say, and they plan it out. And then halfway through, they, are going out and looking for more work. And that's not really what we're expecting. If your work is such that it's coming in dribs and drabs, you probably just want to manage it with a lighter weight framework. Now, Scrum's pretty lightweight, but why are you planning for a couple of weeks if you've only got 3 days worth of work? Why not just plan those 3 days? And my experience is Scrum at less than a week is probably a bit too much. You likely want to be using a more of a Kanban pull approach of just saying that's the thing at the top, let's get it done. That's the next thing, get it done, let's get it done. So one of the drawbacks is it needs enough work to keep a team engaged for a whole sprint. It doesn't need much more. So when I work with teams, very often clients will say, how much do we need to get ready before we get started? Once you have a sprint's worth of work, and that might only be a week's worth of work, get going. Work out the rest as you go along, but you need that week's worth of work to get started first. Okay. So that's one of the drawbacks, and really that ties in with the next one. How often does stuff chop and change? Now, in Scrum, as part of planning, we're going to come up with a sprint goal. We're going to say the most important thing to achieve in the next sprint, let's call it a couple of weeks again, okay, is this. And if all else fails, as long as we achieve that, we're successful. We're not committing to individual items, we're saying we're going to achieve that goal. Now, if you're in an environment that is so volatile that the most important thing that you can work on is regularly changing inside that sprint, then likely Scrum isn't the right thing today. It could be because you need to reduce the volatility. Maybe we're in a world where managers are used to changing their mind and demanding things and expecting immediate action, and damn the consequences. Or maybe you're actually in such a state of place where it truly is that volatile. Work comes up, the importance of work changes rapidly. Very often we see this in service desk environments, where people are responding, incident management and things like that, where actually day-to-day your work can change. And Scrum is not really for that work. It could be a good construct to help you build the discipline, but you're very often going to have to change the goal for the sprint. You're going to have to chop and change your work because there's no point in sticking to it if it's not the most important work. Okay? So those are two. What else? One of the big drawbacks actually of Scrum is it's so widespread, which is a strange one, but it's where people have adopted the language. I come across clients, I come across Scrum Masters who don't actually know Scrum. They know the words. They're willing to talk about sprints and Scrum Masters and product owners, and then they'll insist there are user stories in Scrum and you have to use story points, and RTE will suddenly appear and all these things because it's so popular. It's part of the fabric. It's the furniture. People don't notice it anymore. And they feel like they understand it even if they've never done it, even if they've never really studied it properly. And course or not, you can learn about this stuff, especially by doing it. And for me, that's one of the drawbacks, is because it's now so common and so normal within teams to see Scrum and Scrum-like processes, that people just take it as a matter of fact. And they take that what they do is Scrum, even if it's not. So going into a client, working with a new team, a new organisation, and explaining, actually, you don't do Scrum, is a really hard starting place. Many teams will say, yes, we do Scrum. Yes, we are Agile. And when you start digging into it, you find all sorts of funny, weird implementations. I had one client who, they did sprints. Sprints were a week long. They didn't plan, they didn't do reviews or retrospectives, but they did sprints. They'd renamed weeks. That's really it. And carried on doing what they were doing, but they now did Scrum because they'd adopted the term sprint. It goes back to the days of we're Agile because we do a stand-up kind of thing. They adopt the terminology, and because the Scrum terminology, the language of Scrum, has become so commonplace, it's so easy to adopt, and it doesn't raise an eyebrow. If you say you're a product owner, people are like, okay, yeah, I kind of know what one of those is. Whether you are or not, doesn't matter. They understand it. They'll let it slide. Used to be that I'm a Scrum Master. Well, what's one of them? What do you do? And actually, you can understand it because the people who use the terminology often understood it better. So there's 3 drawbacks of Scrum. Okay, there are more, and it really will come down to the context you find yourself in. So when you approach this as an interview question, you probably want to start understanding their context. The drawbacks for them is going to be more interesting. What can you see, or what are the potential pitfalls that they could experience? And explore with them. I'm always a fan, even in interviews, of asking questions. So if somebody asks me, what can you think of the drawbacks of Scrum? I would probably want to understand about their implementation. Have they done it before? Are they good at it? Do they think they're good at it? Let's be honest. And work with them to say, well, in my experience, when you have a senior leader who's that engaged, but that busy, as the product owner, the team struggles, whatever it is. So that's my take as an interview question. There are many drawbacks. I would probably want to start picking in on what they think. If you've got to this point in the video, I hope you've enjoyed it. If so, a like would be appreciated. If you want to hear more from me, more answers to questions that maybe you've got in the Agile world, please subscribe to the channel. And if you've got a question that you really want answered, drop it in the comments. I promise we'll get around to it. Thank you.